Secretary of State Phil McGrane, you are back for the conclusion of our election series. How are you, sir?
Dude, I'm doing great. Like this election, how could I not be doing great after this election? It went so well, I think, both nationally, locally. We're in a great place.
I told you when you were coming in, I was listening to that Post Malone from the Super Bowl. I have had that on repeat since the election. Not because it's like the guy or gal I wanted or like the people. It's just I feel like there was a connection to the American people in the election this time that I have never experienced in my adult life. And it was people coming out in droves and giving like a mandate and participating in the experience. I was like, God bless it, man. Like we did it. We put together a real election under mass scrutiny, not just nationally, but like internationally, the scrutiny on America and what was going to happen. And we pulled it off. Like the experiment continues.
It does. And will, and I think you're right. I mean, we saw a record number of people show up and vote. Definitely stories, talking to Trent Triple and others about people registering for the first time and they're in their like 50s or even 80s. I think that fits exactly with what you were just saying. People wanting to participate in this process. But I also think all the work that we'd been talking about, the preparation, letting people know how our elections work, transparency, all those efforts, they paid off for sure here in the state of Idaho. We could feel that. But then also it was such a huge sigh of relief for us, especially all the elections teams, to have an answer on election night, as opposed to a long, drawn out. I
mean, is Arizona even going to get it before 2025?
I think everyone is trying, but like the fact that we didn't, everyone was braced, regardless of the direction, whether it went to President Trump, whether it went to Vice President Harris, like that this was going to be a slog. And then it wasn't. We were like, oh, it's Wednesday. Like, ready. We weren't even done counting, and everyone was ready to start moving on to the next chapter. And honestly, the whole system, I think, is better to have a little sigh of relief. But I also think, like here in the state, we had one of the smoothest elections I've ever been a part of. And I've been through quite a few elections over the last 20 years. And so I think all the preparation, what the county clerks did, the poll workers, and really just voters showing up and being engaged. I mean, early voting, you and I talked about it before the election, record numbers of early voting. But one of the things is people were, by and large, really patient, even when they would run into a line here, at the Eagle Library, like the overall things kind of came together really well.
Yeah, I want to take a picture with the poll workers over in my polling location. I did not do that because I was just like, thank you guys. Like, I really appreciate. There was a dude walking around with a sweater that had fish on it that were all like red, white, and blue fish. It was like, God bless you, sir.
That is America at its finest.
Oh, it was so great. Like, I was so happy about that. And we had to go twice because we the first time we had allotted, my wife and I had allotted a half an hour to get through the process. And we pulled up to the voting location and it was like line out people to the street. I mean, out of the gym door, around the sidewalk, up the drive. And they were just like, holy cow. And we went back again and we're like, okay, there are people still here. We went back literally like 3 hours later. There were people still there. So we went and like grabbed a quick burger at a Spring House in Springs, and then went back like right after the lunch rush and was like, okay, we can make it here.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was really cool. And I so appreciated. This was the first time I had been so obviously educated on the mechanism. So when I was talking to people leading up to the election, they're like, well, it'd be cool if everybody just like, we had paper ballots. I'm like, we do have paper ballots. Everybody has paper ballots. And they're like, well, it'd be cool if we had, like secured the ballots afterwards. And I'm like, we secure the ballots. Like, trust me. Like we do it. And just walking through, it was like, really, check.
They should check photo ID. And you're like, they just asked me for
They
photo
did.
ID.
Yeah, right. And of course there are people who are like, okay, but how do you know that they don't mark the ballots with the ID? I'm like, wait, what? Like, what do you say? But that's how far people had to go once. And again, it's not even my job, but like just talking to you, I'm like, okay, check. And then they wanted to find like, well, what about, like, no, man, like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, you're just like, we're going far out there. So,
I think some of those efforts, we have people who put a lot of time and attention into our office, asking all these questions. There's these different election groups. we've seen them in many instances flip to be advocates. So there are still always people who doubt and question.
Sure.
But some of what were our biggest skeptics are now some of our biggest advocates, saying, there's a gentleman, I don't know if you've met Tim O'Donnell. He's very good, done a deep dive into elections and all sorts of things. But he's been great about saying, like, oh, here's areas we could fine tune this, but here's like, look, you are doing these things we asked for. You're doing them. And he's sharing that with others. And I think that's just a great example of, as we share more information, just like you have, answering people's questions, to say, oh, no, we're doing that. Like wherever, whether you grew up here or whether you came from someplace else, answering those questions and just opening up the process to everybody, really just made it go smoother.
There's an aspect of confronting the difficult questions that I feel like you and your office engage in that I don't see all offices that I work with or departments engage in. For instance, Tim O'Donnell, I'm not 100% sure who you're, I don't know if that's his name, but if I'm in your position and I actually want to engage in like knocking these things down like we've done before, right? I would post a video and then I would collect the sentiments and the negative thoughts from people and I would bring them to you in our conversation, say, okay, this person said, what about people that have moved to another state, right? Like, can you be a citizen of 2 states at once? Like, blah, blah, and you explain all of these things. If you want to make the most robust dynamite system, you need those guys that are like, I have a problem with these things. You're like, all right, look, let's solve all of these problems. Let's bring in the detractors. Let's bring in the people that are skeptical and engage with them deeply, understand what they're worried about, and then make a dynamite. It's like the marketplace of ideas, right? Like let's bring the most competition and make the most robust, like junkyard dog, mutt that we can put together. That's a compilation of all these different ideas and solutions.
One of my favorite was last week. So I went to the Ada County Central Committee meeting for the Republican Party. Through the process, they had a resolution. So I started fielding questions about elections. It was first about absentees, and then it shifted over voter roll maintenance, topic you and I have discussed numerous times. And someone got up and they were pretty passionate about it. And they're like, we need to make sure we're removing dead people. We need to make sure we're removing people who move from the Postal Service. And so I got up and I said, well, here's what we do. And I listed like 5 more things than they had even thought of yet. Right. And then specifically talking about NCOA. So that's the National Change of Address Database and work we're doing. And it's like, it's not perfect. So you can't 100% rely on it. It's not the same as some of the other lists we use. But I said, one of the things our office did is we ran the entire voter file prior to this election against the NCOA to see if anybody moved. And we mailed postcards to 80,000 Idahoans to their new address saying, hey, we've been informed that you've moved. Can you please go and update your registration? And we had tens of thousands of people update their registration before the election as a result of it. And me in answering the question and sharing that, what we had done with this guy who started up, fired up about what we need to do. He's like, oh, sounds like you guys are on it. And he just sat back down. Dude, that's the best experience, because you're just like, talk about validating and we're both satisfied because it's like his concerns, because he had legitimate concerns about the cleanliness of the voter rolls, are answered, but also we're taking these proactive steps and sharing what we're doing with everybody. So it goes back to your tutoring days, right? Show your work.
Show your work. And that's such a beautiful thing, that the answer that I keep coming back to with so many problems that people have is like sunlight. Bring sunlight to what people are doing, because it's only in the darkness that I've talked to you about. You familiar with the concept of God of the Gaps?
No.
Okay. So there's God of the Gaps is this broader kind of cognitive mistake that people engage in every single day. And you see it rampant in all different industries. But God of the Gaps is essentially saying, okay, look, there's a gap in understanding, and people have a propensity to insert whatever God they worship into that answer. So I don't know how elections work. They must be fraudulent, or they're doing it because they're fraudulent. I spoke with somebody just the other day, and she was like pointing at me. She's like, and Crapo votes for this guy. And I was like, why are you pointing at me? She's like, well, these people. I'm like, okay, first off, I've never met Crapo. Like, I don't know anything about his professional engagements. And his first name's Mike, right?
Right.
Okay, there we go. I was like, I genuinely don't know these people. And she's like, well, he only voted for such and such a guy because he's beholden to BlackRock and Bill Gates. I'm like, wait, what?
Yeah. How did you go from this to that?
Yeah, exactly. And it's frustrating because and again, I always like chatting with people about this stuff, and I was a little tired at the time. I'm like, okay, are you really reducing down somebody's hyper complex political decision to like the most base motivation of like they're beholden to these horrible, scary people? I was like, that's more a commentary on your worldview than on what somebody's motivations are. Like, I don't even know why my wife cooks what she cooks at night, right? Like, I can't pin down why my kids do certain things, but you want to attribute intention to somebody who you've never met.
Like
and
so far removed. And
it's like, and you interpret and then decide that in the absence of your understanding, you're right in saying that this person is beholden to like this big money. It's like, so that's kind of got to the gap. So people with that thing, the idea that I find that resolves that, or at least offers opportunity, is like, let's bring light to the complexity of this. Right? Let's bring light to what's going on, and maybe your worldview won't change completely, but it will at least be pushed upon, right? Like it will be challenged by these little things.
Yes, and you have to, and actually, I'm in a great example of that related to the election cycle. So one of the things our office oversees is campaign finance. Right. All the candidates, all the PACs, all these have to report their money. And because there are these narratives, and part of the campaign finance story is, it's called our sunshine laws for a reason, because you're trying to shine light and say, oh, if you're going to attribute motivations, specifically campaign contributions and other things, people, like, let's make sure that it all holds up. One of my favorite examples to always share, because people talk a ton about, like, you know, in this cycle this year, tons of money came in. We had out-of-state money coming in from, you know, Make Liberty Win and these groups funding the Proposition 1, other things. But if we wind back again a few years, there was a state senator, longtime state senator, Jeff Sidaway. He's no longer in the state senate anymore. He's a sheep herder from eastern Idaho. And because he was his position, he was a chairman of some prominent committees. People would say, oh, you're beholden to, and you name the corporate organization or whatever, he got accused of things, except for through his entire political career, he never accepted a dollar from anybody. He didn't need to. He's well known in his community. And part of that sunshine is both showing who is giving money and to whom, but it's also showing that people like him, like, aren't beholden to anybody. He is intentionally chosen that this isn't how his path is, didn't need it. And not to say that that's better than the other, but just to say, like, look, like, your narrative isn't holding up. This is why we provide this disinfectant, is so that you can see what's happening in our politics. And, you know, I expect, like, that's going to be one of the things we talk about more. This election cycle, there was way more money and things. And so we're going to continue to work to shed more light on this, give people more information so that they can, I guess, close the gaps, as you put it.
Yeah. Yeah. And you have to, the other aspect of that, with like the Sunshine Report, I've been there before, like went and checked out some stuff because somebody pointed out, they're like, this guy got $40,000 from himself. I'm like, wait, I don't understand how that works. But like, sure enough, it was like, this dude donated $40,000 or like
to his own campaign.
Yeah. I don't know how that works. You'll have to explain that to me one day. But the point
I don't have $40,000 to loan to myself, so I don't know that I can't explain how it works.
But like, if he doesn't use all of that, does that go back to him?
If he loans it, yes. If he donates to the campaign, no.
Okay, so he can loan the money to the campaign and then record that he got a loan from himself. Yeah. And then if he loans himself $40,000 and only spends $15,000, he gets a check for $25,000 back.
Yeah.
Wow, man. Anyway, what I find really interesting, and I was really inspired by your willingness to work in this, is that I've been thinking about, for the last several months, why do people arrive at the positions they do, and how are people arriving there? And with the concerns around elections, again, you and I have spoken about it. There's this concern about the efficacy and security of elections that's percolated throughout the nation, right? Not just Idaho, but everywhere. And again, in Idaho, I've never met somebody who had a bad experience. And in addressing that, it's like, okay, well, if they've never had a bad experience, where did this sentiment come from? Oh, sure. And my answer ultimately was like, well, these people were told, right? And again, I know there might be somebody out there with a really bad election experience or feeling like, hey, I'm 99% sure my county voted this way and it didn't. And like, we can't verify and all these things. But addressing these problems where the problems exist, where the problems originated, is paramount to actually communicating with people. Because if there's a large social media movement or media movement around how elections are fraudulent, and then somebody just puts something on a website, it's like, the problem didn't originate on a website. The problem originated over here, and you're addressing it over here. And the people that are hanging out over here are not going to websites. So like you're mismatching. But you're spearheading, hey, look, let's do everything's on the table to communicate with people. I'm going to run at the football game. I'm going to do like emojis.
I don't know
Instagram.
if I was running at the roll at the football game. I don't know. We'll see. Yeah.
Roll with the punches, baby. But I was really inspired by that because I was like, here's a dude who is genuinely, we've moved away from obligatory communication, which exists in lots of offices, like, oh, you have to give 14-day warning before an election in a local newspaper. That's obligatory communication. Everyone knows that has almost zero effect, but it's codified into law. So I'm going to communicate in this way because I have to do it. You moved away from, I'm just going to do like a Facebook post or a press release. And you're like, let's communicate the way people are communicating, whatever that looks like.
Right.
Like, let's find that and address the communication there. And I feel like that was really effective.
I think it was really effective. I also think something you said, like, is so important to the work that we do in elections. It's not just about the elections or the elections process. Like so many people, your focus is on, look at the work we're doing a great job. And certainly that's part of the narrative that we're sharing. But, when I first became county clerk, one of the things I set out the mission for the office as to serve our community in a way that builds trust in government. It's not that builds trust in the office or in me as a public official. Part of that is with elections, yes, we want people to have confidence in the Secretary of State's office. We want people to have confidence in the clerks and the poll workers, all those people. But at the end of the day, with our work, like you mentioned, Mayor Pike, right?
Yes.
And that election and how close and contentious all that was. There are strong emotions and attention last year during that election. The community's ability to move forward hinges on people having confidence in the process that determined who the new mayor. They don't have to like the whoever wins. It doesn't have to be their preferred choice and say like, but their ability, the mayor's ability, doesn't matter what mayor it is, doesn't matter what governor, state senator, is all hinged on people accepting that, like, whether I like you or not, you were duly elected, you reflect the will of the community. That's the fundamentals of this country, is that we don't have people who are anointed to these positions, that we, the people, are the ones who select our leaders. And sometimes we select leaders that we don't always get our way. Like that's part of the American process too. But having confidence in that process. So anything we can do to build trust in the process doesn't just build trust in us. It builds trust in all these other elected leaders who are out, serving their school boards, serving at the Capitol building, serving in Washington, D.C. That is really fundamental to this process. And I've just been fortunate enough to have a front row seat to this since right out of college. Like, and there's so much attention going back to the 2020 election. You and I have talked about it a ton, but my career started after the 2000 election. The Florida hanging Chad, all this other stuff. Like, that's where it all, like, this isn't the first time. This isn't the last time. But we will continue to get better. We've added things. Right now we have auditors. My staff is traveling around the state, going through and hand counting ballots to audit the results. That's a new addition to our process, but it gives people greater confidence. When they go in and they look on the wall and they see, oh, Jason Dixon from Bannock County has been audited twice and it's been successful. People are like, all right, I can trust that.
Right. Excuse me. I was actually thinking about this exact thing, which is, this goes on. Like, I'm so proud of the work you and I did and the conversations we had in just exploring and understanding this stuff over over October. And then, this last one in November, I was so happy with that. I'm like, dude, I feel like we did something. Like, this is great.
Yeah.
And then I instantly realized, like, oh, there's another election next year. And there will be more people that moved here. There are people that we obviously didn't reach. There will be problems that come up and commentary that need to be addressed. But I instantly, do you ever watch, this is really frustrating. Do you watch the Macy's Thanksgiving Parade?
I watch parts of it. I mean, the kids like to watch it.
It used to be good. Like, they're so trash. Like, it's just one big revolving commercial. And the only thing for sure is that you're going to get like, oh, this new Disney character float, or like, oh, this blah, 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 whatever it might be. But the other thing that for sure you're going to get is the onion cutting video. So at some point in that Macy's Day Parade, there will be some celebrity talking about how to appropriately cut the onion without like getting teary-eyed.
Sure.
And it cracks me up because like, who's cutting the onion this year?
They that's your
thing.
breakthrough.
That's right. And it's like, oh, if it, like I have a propensity to systematize things and like really break down the pieces and figure out what makes the whole. And that I realized that's one of them. Like, oh, so they probably have a checklist somewhere. It's like, okay,
it's on the list.
Brian, you're doing the onion. All right, onion's done. Okay, that's going to be at 11:15 before the okay, good. And then then we'll move on to like the dancing people, and that's I feel like we're like, oh, maybe Phil and I are going to have like an annual thing where we do the onion cutting every October, and we come in and we talk about Idaho elections. We talk about
the narrative's going to change. Going to the city elections versus the presidential election. Absolutely.
Right. All of this stuff comes back to helping people understand how government is functioning so that our citizens in Idaho cannot be easily manipulated by people that are declaring that Idaho is bought and sold and screwed up. And then people fall out of faith with the state of Idaho. They become jaded. They become cynical. They don't want to participate. And we have an easily manipulated populace. That is the end result of nobody believing in elections. And it dissolves into chaos.
Right.
And to whatever degree we can push the opposite direction and instill faith and help people participate and have confidence and then realize that, hey, maybe my guy or gal didn't win, but like this is the way the cookie crumbles and we move on and we do a better job next time. That's where we need to move to, because that's the point where we have like the most educated, most participating, most badass population in the entire country in this little awesome state.
Right. Yeah. No, and I think one of the things, this election, hopefully everyone looks at the results, looks at the outcome, and like, yeah, that makes sense. Like whether it's the presidential election here in Idaho, whether it's Proposition 1, whether it's some of the local elections, I definitely know people who are celebrating. I know people who are licking their wounds. But so far, everyone's kind of like, when they look at it, they pan out and they see it. You're like, yeah, that seems to fit with where Idaho's going.
Right.
And I think it's interesting too, for all the people who are listening, who have just recently moved to Idaho, you take a second to look at the results and see, like, you came here for a reason. We see that continuing to be conveyed. One of the things we've been sharing after the election, looking at the results, is just the shifts happening in Idaho.
Right.
One of the big surprises to me was up in the Panhandle. So Panhandle's been kind of some of the reddest of the red territory. And somehow it figured out how to get way more red. And I think it's people moving here who are, you're like, how did Kootenai County gain 8 points? I didn't know there was 8 points to gain in Kootenai County, but sure enough, they did. And, it's an interesting thing to see. We'll see this play out as we head into the legislative session coming up. But I know for our team, we feel awesome about how this went. There's just a number of things we can point to. And I think the prep work, the conversations you and I have been having have played a huge role in all of that, along with everything else, all the work on the ground to make it come together.
Right. Listen, man, I appreciate you. You came in 4 times in October. You're coming in here to do a roundup, a recap. It has been awesome. I appreciate you. God bless America.
God bless America.
I can't wait to keep these conversations going. I think I told you this. I have a studio. I have a second studio set up a block away from the Capitol.
Yes.
For the legislative session. And I'm super pumped to be able to connect with people in real time. It's like, just walk a block, come on down. We'll do a 20-minute episode. It'll go live in a half an hour, right? Like, and we'll be able to, again, bring more sunshine to the happenings of Idaho to help people not just that have been here forever, but help people moving here orient themselves and be less persuaded and manipulated by nefarious or outside forces. I so appreciate you helping me do that with the elections, and God bless you.
Hey, Matt, like, the work you're doing is awesome. I think exactly giving information to people they've never had before, and an insider's view. I think it's been huge for the election, but I think just moving forward, exactly, being down at the Capitol, everything else, it's going to be awesome.
It's going to be awesome.
Yep.
Thanks for coming, sir. I appreciate you.
Same.